Tēnā koutou katoa, good evening. At least 100 migrants, 6 properties and multiple companies are now at the centre of an Immigration New Zealand probe into a complex case of widespread visa fraud.
And in news just to hand, Immigration Minister Andrew Little has just held an emergency press conference this evening saying he's seeking assurances accredited employers are properly checked.
The developments follow a Newshub investigation that uncovered dozens of hungry, jobless men crammed into filthy, rundown properties in South Auckland. Nick Truebridge has the latest.
The pictures are sickening. 40 men with no food crammed into a 3-bedroom Papakura house. Nearby, at least 20 more are shoved into a second home. There's one stove, an overflowing bin, one shower. What we uncovered here is the tip of the iceberg.
Our team have spoken to 115 Indian and Bangladeshi nationals, and we're still working through some further information to understand the number of companies and the number of individuals involved. We've spoken to 2 employers at this stage.
So what we know is these are just 2 of 6 houses linked to the investigation. Officials say multiple agencies are involved and the Indian High Commission's been called in to support.
These individuals appear to have paid for jobs and for visas to travel to New Zealand. They have arrived in New Zealand and there have been employment contracts but no jobs. This is quite simply a fraud.
While over 100 have already been interviewed by immigration, some haven't even arrived yet. So the ministry now has the task of contacting offshore visa holders linked to the case to tell them to stay home. The union representing some of these men estimates thousands are being exploited under the accredited employer work visa scheme.
I think we are barely scratching the surface here. Given the desperation and vulnerability of these migrant workers, there are thousands and thousands of cases out there because recently there has been large number of migrants who have been brought into the country under accredited employer work visa scheme.
One man tied up in this case is Chanjit Singh. We found him preparing roti on the floor of one of the Papakura properties. Only a young man, he travelled here to support family back home.
Look what they have done with us. Everyone feels bad.
Instead of working, he spends all day here, the sort of scene that has union leaders questioning the system.
We think that MBI need to resource its department to ensure that there are enough labour inspectors who can go out and do the spot checks on such employers.
Meanwhile, Minister Andrew Little called an emergency press conference this afternoon to say he'll seek assurances such checks on employers do happen after allegations in an anonymous letter.
Particular allegations were that some checks on employers were not being made and some checks as part of the job check process were not being made.
But for these men, it may be too little too late.
Kia ora, Nick. Now, you've heard from an Immigration New Zealand source about the checking of employers. What do they have to say about it?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. And I guess the process of putting this investigation out, we did hear from someone who said they work at Immigration New Zealand. They have talked about these checks on employers. First of all, they say there are no meaningful checks as to a business's viability or as to whether that business is actually genuine. They also talk about there being a culture of speed, a culture of trying to get these processes through instead of actually being meticulous in terms of checking whether these employers are actually viable. There's also, they say, applications that have been processed when a business doesn't appear to have an actual business address. They don't appear to have an actual website. They don't appear to have, let's say, a shop or a store. Now, Andrew Little, in his letter to the State Services Commissioner, has called these concerns, these allegations, extremely serious. But he himself, earlier this week, did talk about one of the businesses in relation to some of the latest cases we've seen being in liquidation. So you have to ask, if a business was on the verge of liquidation, what checks were done there before they became accredited in this scheme. Lots more questions and we will keep digging into them.
Indeed, well done. Tēnā koe, Nick.